And he said something that really, he wasn't explicit about this, but my read of what he said was that the Comics Code, besides infantilizing comic books, also would infantilize the audience. And I think that's to a certain extent true. You guys have been sort of, genetically reprogrammed and refigured to read material that is beneath your dignity, but you're willing to buy it because they've told you it's good. As talent, I know full well that the brand is the talent, yet the companies have convinced you otherwise, that the material is the brand. So you're willing to read bad Wolverine stories because it's Wolverine. It's Wolverine. It's the X-Men. As opposed to reading interesting, challenging material by artists and writers or cartoonists, as Dean and I are, in the service of more adventurous and more challenging material.
Well, do you think that's partially the function of the fact that years ago, the readers cycled out apparently every 5 years, so they were regurgitating for the next 5 years worth of fan base the same type of stories until comics got adult for the ones who stuck around? You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. It's a possibility. I don't know.
Kind of like when Flagg happened in '83.
Well,
that was for the next 5 years. For the the reader that kept graduating and getting older.
Well, the 80s was a strange time. I mean, I'm ghettoized as an 80s talent. I spent too much of my life and time apologizing for Star Wars and taking credit for Flagg. And it's this 8-year window, starting in the mid-70s and ending in the early 80s. And there was an enormous enthusiasm for comics in the 80s that seemed genuine, that seemed real and about the medium. And
recognized by people who weren't necessarily reading comics, the media, let's call it.
I still, back then, I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, I believe that comics were identified by a visionary television executive named Brandon Tartikoff, who briefly owned the rights to all of Marvel's material through a company called New World. And Brandon came up against two real serious issues. One, and this is what, the late 70s, early 80s, around that time? Early 80s? Yes. And he was a boy wonder, so all of his fellow executives were a decade older than he was. And they did not see the material the way he did, because they identified it as because they were the guys who perceived comics as a genre as opposed to a medium. And then of course he drops dead. Okay, he dies. And when I was working in the television business, the love or hate of comic books would wax and wane in the show business. And much of that time was spent in meetings explaining to people that no, I don't think this particular guy that's so popular is the shit. I don't really think that and rather he shames me and embarrasses me by being in the business and doing the work that he does. So Hollywood has always been, the guys who used to beat us up in high school for reading comic books now making money off our asses.
But would you say today's CEOs are the fans?
To a certain extent, but they still regard the material, the creators of the original material, with a certain benign contempt. I think, I mean, if you look at the metrics, I said this to somebody yesterday, and I stand by this. Kevin Feige is the only genius actually operative in comic books today, because he has managed to take material, movies, and monetize to the tune of billions of dollars. Material based on on primary material, our material, which 99.99.99% of the people buying spending those billions have either no idea it exists or don't really give a shit if it does. Right. And that is the equivalent of the alchemist's stone. He has made gold from lead. And it is stunning to me, because I live in a small town. And 10 years ago when the Iron Man picture first started trailering, all my neighbors who had no idea what I did for a living, because what we do is a private act. You know, we don't show up at a shop and say, hey, cartoonists. You know. And these people had no idea that it was a comic book. And when informed, their indifference to this information was profound. It was enormous. And so
I always hear often I wanted to draw comics. I'm like, no, you didn't. I don't believe you. Like, that's a cool thing to say now.
No, it's like all those hot actors and actresses claiming they were nerds.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. I know what being a shit on loser in comics in high school was like. I was there. I was one. And when I look at my high school graduation picture, I look like a thumbprint with glasses. And it wasn't until I discovered drugs and alcohol that I became the person you see before you today.
And
what I love is the fact that he knows I'm telling the truth, Martha knows I'm telling the truth, and all you guys think it's a goofy gag, but it's true.
But I always look cool. I always look cool.
Yeah. Bear in mind, I've known Dean since he was a virgin. And I wasn't there for the loss, but I was there for the after party.
Please don't do that. You did this last year.
I did. It involved a dance.
Did you pay the bill?
It involved, what's that?
Did he pay the bill?
It wasn't that kind of party. But I did an actual, an interpretive dance, my version of Isadora Duncan, demonstrating the day after the Dean
Like a post-coital euphoria.
It wasn't post-coital. It was because you'd already gone. You were well past coast. You were into post reconsideration code. And it was in my office, and I did an interpretive dance on the stage that I thought was just pretty demonstrative of the experience.
The key part of the word being monster.
Oh, snap. A word I learned from Dean. Dean taught me everything I need to know about being hip by the standards and impressions of a then 17-year-old boy in New York City. Dean was a white half Jew who desperately wanted to be black when he grew up.
Yep.
And it didn't work out.
Working on it. Trying to identify.
He would have been better off just going for the Jew part.
Yeah. And just to also react to something you said, when I wanted to be a cartoonist, I decided at age 12, I became otherwise unemployable because I decided I was going to make comics for the rest of my life at some point. And then at age, I guess 17, 5 years later is when I would be assisting Howard and Bill Sienkiewicz and Walter Simonson at Upstart Studios in Manhattan. And I'm trying to remember, what year was the Star Wars comics, 77?
I think 76 or 77, I don't remember.
So
there was, all the comedy aside, there was a shitload of drugs and alcohol back then. I have very little memory of specific dates.
And I remember...
I've written down when I married my wife. That's a bit.
But I remember...
Not my current wife.
The comic book came out before the movie, by the way. I don't know if anybody knows that. And I picked up
3 months before.
Yeah, I picked up this comic, issue 1. So I would have been maybe 10 years old before I dedicated my life at age 12 to this thing that we do. And then it would be about 7 years later that I'd be working for this guy on something completely different than the way I was introduced to his work. And yeah, so from there. And just to say, like, I identified something recently that the newsstand, when we had newsstands where you would buy comics that come out once a week, it wasn't like a comic shop, where you could, subscribe and all that. You had to get there before someone else got those comics. It wasn't until last year that I realized at 79th Street and Broadway, where I grew up in the Upper West Side, that this little newsstand was right in front of this ginormous church. And I'm not religious, being half Jew, and my mother canceled me out with her being Catholic, but I didn't grow up with any religion. That's what became my religion in a lot of ways. I don't know about how you feel about comics, because you keep coming back to it. You went away for 10 years.
I didn't go away from it. That's wrong.
Okay.
No, I mean, the truth is, I discovered comic books when I was 4 years old. I had 2 cousins who were as bifurcated and Catholic Jew as you. My mother's oldest sister married an Italian, and these 2 kids were really fucked up by their upbringing. Bobby and Alan Correnti. And they outgrew comics. Bobby was 8 years senior, my senior. Alan was 6 years my senior. And they gave me a refrigerator box filled with comic books, and it was all genre, it was everything. Because in those days, you read comics. I mean, there was Western stuff, cowboys, and all sorts of Injury to the Eye Motif comics, all this stuff. And I got into the box. And
wait. Injury to the Eye Motif.
You have to read Seduction of the Innocent.
Oh, okay.
And I can still bring up the sense memory of the smell of that paper. Because of that mildewy stuff.
Yeah, I can smell that.
And at 4, and I understand, this is not a self-flattery, it's a simple statement of fact. I'm one of the smartest people I know. And a lot of that started early on. I mean, by the time I was 5, I was reading on a 5th grade level because of comic books, but that's another story.
We talked at one point how you were interested in critical thought early on.
Yeah. But I also, at 4, realized that someone made this. That this was not something that just happened organically. That it was a creation of the real, and I wanted to do that. And I had no talent, I had no skill set, I never indicated anything like talent, but I had hunger and blind rage. And I've come to believe that comics has more in common with the Jesuit priesthood than it does with any other art form.
Which
Because,
aspect?
pardon me?
Which aspect of the Jesuit?
The concept of the calling, that we are called upon. When I hear someone say that they came to comics as a second choice, my bullshit detector just goes haywire. Because no one would choose this for a living as a second choice. It is a calling. There is something curious and peculiar about the material. There are people who understand it immediately and people who cannot grasp it at all. That it is a matter of a gestalt relationship of words to picture that has no relative, nothing else that relates to it elsewhere. I recently found out in a conversation, someone I trust explicitly, that Ed Sorel, the great cartoonist, regards comics as a bastardized and ugly form. He holds it with utter contempt, which I found absolutely fascinating. Because I love the language. I mean, the content of comics bores the living shit out of me. I find it utterly uninteresting to me for the most part. Whereas I love the language of comics. And I'm not a nostalgist. I'm really not. I believe that nostalgia is bad nostalgia. But I also recognize the fact that the train has left the station for me in terms of material that is of graphic and narrative interest to it that I care enough about to see it more than once.
Do you think that the reason, and I have an earlier question, do you think the reason why you stick with it right now is because of the challenge of the graphic narrative that you continue to?
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is when I first read, okay, I'm interested in wanting to do comics now, and it just takes a blank piece of paper and you start there, right? That's the entry fee in a lot of ways. But when you start to read a little bit of the interviews and the history of comics, the thing that I walked away often was how embarrassing it was for these people. It was an embarrassment, and that always bummed me out because I'm about to dedicate my life to something, and I'm supposed to be embarrassed by it.
Well, when I was a little boy in the early days of the comic book convention business, before Phil Suling sort of made it big, it was a guy named Bernie Bubnis. Bernie Bubnis ran the conventions in New York for 2 years, and he sold it to Star Suling and disappeared. I had no idea where he is. And in New York, those shows were in the 4th of July weekend, and it was a slow news week in those days. And they would have the third string stand-up guy standing up there saying the equivalent of, can you believe grown men are actually buying this crap? That was the extent of it. And it looked shaming and looked embarrassing. It looked like something I would never want to be involved in. So I didn't go to a comic book convention. I told you he was a professional. Because I felt I could at least have a badge of some credential and credibility. But I mean, Joe Orlando always talked about how after the Catawba Commission hearings in the early 50s, Johnny Craig's wife shamed him out of comics. Johnny Craig ended up moving back to Pennsylvania and becoming a clip art artist. He drew nothing but here's the refrigerators and housewives.
Both Joe and Johnny, Joe Orlando and Johnny Craig, I believe, were both EC comic artists. And then Joe went on to become an editor at DC, and he was my first editor at DC.
But Joe also, survived the 50s and the early 60s at Mad Magazine. Being a second-rate George Wallace Wood.
Right.
And then finding an actual more reasonable path for his own work. But yeah, it was. People don't really know what it is we do, and to a scary extent, people on your side of the table have very little idea of how we do gets done. Because I've said more than once recently, there are writers in the room, so be kind. That's to me. When you respond to the writing in a comic book, which you're actually responding to, is the execution of the artist's interpretation of the writer's text. Because in most cases, writers in comics have little or no understanding of the real estate of the page, the volume of the page, how small the page is, and the page has shrunk over the past couple of years. And I don't mean in terms of printing, I'm talking in terms of the volume of content that can be placed on the page has become daunting enough that it's made the page smaller. And one of the reasons I write my own stuff is that I'm a better writer than most of the writers I know, and I also feel that I have a pretty clear idea what the page feels and looks like. The problem with that is that I don't have a particular interest or enthusiasm for mainline, mainstream power fantasies. My power fantasies have nothing to do with adolescence. They have to do with moral corruption and money. Those are more interesting to me. And comics is packed with people who are very nice, who aren't very good.
Well, speaking to that, when I met you in '85, you were already
84, actually.
84. You were basically a year and a half, 2 years into Flagg, and again, there was a Star Wars, there's an American Flagg. There was material in between Star Wars and Flagg. And what happened? What was the leap for you to get to Flagg?
Well, the only difference between me and I'll be 68 on Saturday next, and the only difference between that and me at 28 is that I can now put my money where my mouth is. I was old hat and no cattle back then. I had nothing going on. I had nothing to deliver. I was skill-free. I had ambition, but I lacked the skill set to demonstrate anything of value in the service of that ambition. And the material that was being given to me I recognized as absolute shit, but that I had nothing to bring to it to improve it. So there was a bifurcated shittiness. It was both shitty work, and I was doing a shitty job delivering shitty in the service of shitty work.
Whereas, a side note, Alex Toth couldn't necessarily save a bad story, but it looked amazing.
I've compared Alex Toth to Phil Spector in the sense that both of them were able to take absolute dross and make art out of dreck.
Yes.
I mean, there's no one's going to tell me that Be My Baby or the Do Ron Ron is poetry, but it is art.
Yes.
When I hear the those opening notes of the Do Ron Ron, I cannot. I'm thinking it right now when I'm getting goosebumps, and I'm serious. Okay.
Howard was the first person when I recognized later, because I didn't know these songs, but in American Flagg, when they shoot the guns, it's from a song. Pop, pop, ooh, the travel, and then when you hit go mow, mow. Papa, ooh, mow, mow. I don't know if anybody noticed that.
I'm an embarrassing lover of puns and plays on words. I subscribe to the Jack Cole motto of Plastic Man, which is thrills, chills, and laughs. And when I was a little boy, and I read Richard Kyle's statement that adult comics would never be adult comics except in the context of humor, I took great umbrage at this because I was like all comic book fans, mistaking gravity for enormity. And when I learned not to mistake gravity for enormity, I realized that the only way I could bring an actual adult sensibility to the material I was doing in my own right was to make it funny. You know,
I always say that you need levity to impart something serious.
Well, no, I think you need levity to break shit up.
Well, that's
because it's self-awareness is something that is utterly bereft in comics. It doesn't exist. And every time I try to do self-awareness in a superhero comic that I'm writing it, I literally get shit on by the editor. When I did that black and white thing, Petty Crimes, which is all about my own, I live in California. And California is the first church of recovery and entitlement. And those of you who have driven in California know that if you drive on the left-hand lane and you do the speed limit, you're obeying the law, but you are being a complete and total passive-aggressive twat. Because the law doesn't apply. I have utter contempt for the law, and I have a deep respect for the rules of the social contract we make amongst ourselves. You don't fucking talk in the middle of a movie. You turn your fucking phone off during a play. You don't drive the speed limit in the left-hand lane. You don't get in this 15 items or less line with 16 items. Don't pay with a fucking check. Stop.
Yep.
Cut it out. You share the fucking world with the rest of us, you douchebags. And in the course of this story, I wanted to do a...
How to share space with Howard
Batman is asked a storekeeper there's a corpse lying in a parking lot because not only she took 16 items into the line, but she also left a shopping cart in the parking space. And the storekeeper asks him how he gets around in the outfit, and he says, I'm willing to mistake comfort. I'm willing to give up comfort for effect. And the editor just refused to let that go. And for me, Batman is about a rich guy who had a bad day when he was 8. You know. And we're paying that price, you know. It's just,
So going back to how did Flagg arrive? Can you recall now?
Yeah, I was driven out of comics by Jim Shooter,
okay,
who insists we're pals. I went home and I did other things for a living. I discovered to my chagrin that I was never going to be a really good illustrator because I don't have the chops, I don't have the technique for it. Nor do I have the patience. I look at guys who are really good, and I recognize the fact that either they are lightning or they are methodical, and I'm not.
Well, I've always looked at your art in hindsight as as architecture.
Yes, but it's also architecture in the service of narrative.
Exactly.
That's all it's about. I mean,
That's right.
one separate from the other, they are of less value.
And design, it's a lot of design.
No, but the design itself is in service of
Right.
narrative. It is a synergy of visual and text.
Right.
And I was offered money by First Comics, and I had no idea why to this day. There was nothing indicating in my work that I did in the 70s that would justify them offering money to do. And I was in serious dire financial straits because of the currently dead Byron Prize.
How did they advertise at first American Flagg? Like, what is this comic? Who is this person?
They had no idea what they bought the book, and they liked what I was delivering, and the book broke because of Kim Thompson.
Okay.
Kim saw it at the Small Press Expo, and was blown away by the black and whites, and had said some wonderful things about it in print. The book never achieved its real sales. I mean, let us accept the fact that American Flagg is to comic books in the way that Lester Young is to white-tack saxophone players in the 1950s. It existed to be a textbook and source guide for a lot of the guys who became professional comic book artists in the 80s and 90s. And now, of course, in the aughts and now in teens, I'm being pilloried by people who are using technique that I pioneered, which I find greatly ironic for these ignorant fucking shitweasels who have no idea of the history of their own medium.
Yeah.
But boy, they just love comics.
They love comics.
Graphic novels, 50 chapters, how to do it. Fuck you. 50 chapters, my ass.
And how many issues did you do of Flagg?
I did 12, took 2 off, and then did another 12. And you have to understand that the lesson I learned from that material was that I was not the journeyman I thought I was. I believed I was ultimately completely replaceable. I felt that even though George Wonder was nowhere near the talent that Milton Caniff was, his taking over the Terry of the Pirates was fairly seamless to an audience that didn't give a shit one way or the other.
Well, but...
And I thought the work that followed me on Flagg was just disgusting. It was awful. It was badly written. It was badly conceived.
Right.
And it was just a drag fest.
You mean on Flagg because First Comics owned this?
No, they didn't. We had a this gets into the law. They had a right to do it plus a payout if they didn't do it. And the reason the rights reverted back to me, I owned the trademark, and in those days I incorporated because, I don't know what it's like now, but in those days you had to be a corporation to grant a perpetual license. They granted a perpetual license, they had to pay me a certain minimum fee every year to sustain it. When that minimum fee was not paid, the material reverted back to me.
But didn't you feel like that's your first auteur piece?
I don't, in it, you don't think it.
Right.
When you were, I mean, I've been reading.
But
your
you
stuff.
served publishers and their franchises, right? For a little while.
That is my job.
And that's your job.
That is my job.
But then Flagg happens, and that's a different job, isn't it?
No.
No?
Because basically, our function is to move product. As crass as that may sound.
Okay, so you saw Flagg as product.
I did.
Okay.
But I also recognize the fact that Flagg represented, for me, that I now have learned that technique has value. What can I do if I actually commit myself wholeheartedly to a job? Okay.
What risks did you feel like?
Your mom.
It's my mom. What
Mark is
risks
calling.
did you feel you were taking on Flagg that you hadn't taken yet?
I didn't think in those terms,
Okay.
ever. I never thought in those terms.
Okay.
Because basically I say hi to your mom.
I don't want to do that. Like, why is she calling me right now?
Because she knows you're here, she wants to fuck with your dad.
That's right. She wants to know how the comments going. It's going great, Mom.
It's great, Mom.
I love you. So.
Actually, Dean's mom is a lovely woman. His godmother is a much more interesting character.
Oh yeah, Shelley Winters. I'm on planet Earth because of Shelley Winters, but we can talk about that later.
Okay. So back to you.
No, but so you didn't see a difference necessarily doing Flagg?
No.
Except that you were doing the whole package
Yeah.
and everything. Okay.
Well, and in your work, when I look at Billy Dogwood compared to Beef and Tomato, it's clear that Beef and Tomato is deeply personal, whereas Billy Dogma is you doing poetic detachment of your own emotional experience. Okay. You made a conscious decision not to do a career based on commercial work.
Yeah, well, I wasn't good enough.
Well, but neither was I.
But you somehow did it, you know?
You see, I think the reason you weren't, again, I shouldn't say this in front of people, but I think you don't work on it.
No, well, I put a lot of labor and I put a lot of hours into it. But what do you mean by that?
I don't think you think enough about the labor before you do it.
Okay.
I think analysis of the material is an imperative. You know, I'm in the process of writing the third and final Times Squared volume. And it is really, really hard, because I'm not 35 anymore, and I don't think like that anymore. And I have to be reminded by my editor, the guy who edits me. See, having an editor, that's one of those things, that I have to remember to overwrite. Because Times Squared is all about the text and the language. It's about overwritten material. And I've been trying to lean out my work. I'm trying to, keep it, get it simpler and cleaner. And I finally hit my sweet spot with this stuff on page 8 of the rewrite. When I work, I do everything geometrically. I break it down on cards. I transcribe one line, because each card is a page, but no matter what you think, the page is really tiny, and you can put all you need on the index card. All this material is now in panel breakdown form, so I'm doing dialogue, my first pass dialogue things. And it's really hard, because I don't think like it. And I don't want to do snarky japery. I want to do narrative that has context.
Well, the years between there was the first Times Square, and then there was Black Mariah's, the second one?
Yeah, 2 years.
2 years, and now the third one, how many years?
It's 30.
30 years.
31 years.
There's no way you're going to do anything like that.
But I'm still really good.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But absolutely, and maybe even better.
Oh, I'm better at a lot of stuff.
Right.
But I'm much more dogmatic than I was at that point. I was much more pragmatist in my 30s than I am dogmatic in my 60s.
Right.
Because a lot of my belief systems have codified.
Well, I was going to say, also, what are you trying
or maybe atrophied. I don't know.
But in that 30 years, you must have seen what are the trends of Howard Chaykin? What is it, things you keep revisiting? And how is that different now?
I love transformation. It's one of my interests in transvestism. I grew up in my parents were both huge fans of the Jewel Box Review, so they went to the Jewel Box Review every year when it came through town. My first job as an artist, I worked at a place where all the other employees, with the exception of me and my boss, were Puerto Rican transvestites. And I found the culture fascinating and very attractive in its sort of lubriciousness. And I partied with these guys. My mom and I partied with these guys. It's not a show. My brother didn't realize that those cigarettes we were getting fucked up. My mother had no idea that was marijuana we were smoking. But she kept heard that phrase, the sweet smell of air. I never smelled sweet. It smelled like shit, She thought everybody was farting and smoking at the same time. And so transformation is what it's about, and that seems to go completely antithetical to the expectations of the audience.
Although that sounds like a superhero comic.
No, it doesn't, because superhero comic books are not about transformation, but they're about the presentation of transformation. They're about the idea of look at the Infinity Gauntlet War or whatever that shit was. Sorry, Tom. The fact is everybody dies, but not really.
Not really.
Okay.
That's right.
And somebody at Marvel once said, and not condescendingly or snarkily, about Claremont stuff. The Claremont stuff was all about high-flying adventure, degenerate behavior, ending up with a nice warm bath and hot meal and a cookie. And so that you can't, corporate characters cannot be allowed to really change. And I realized only a couple of months ago that one of the reasons why.
So Jim Shooter was right.
Oh yes, Shooter.
Kill Jean Grey.
No, but keep her dead.
But keep her dead. And I think he would have kept her dead.
I mean, I don't think so.
No.
I'm not. Shooter also never understood Kirby's idea of what Dr. Doom should look like in the Mask.
Wait, who didn't?
Shooter, Jack.
Shooter, right.
So, I mean, when I did this book last year, The Divided States of Hysteria.
Which, by the way, I know you. So, a few years ago, I say to Howard, whatever happened to Reuben Flagg of American Flagg? And he sent me the first issue of Divided States of Hysteria. So they can take it over there.
And much of the hostility of the book, directed at the book by people who hadn't read the book but had heard from their friends, was that there was a transgender character in the book who was raped. She wasn't raped. Who killed someone, who did kill someone in self-defense, who, by the end of the book, has become the heroine of the book.
Yep.
The moral center of the book, and the romantic interest of the hero, who has found himself in love with a transgender woman. Okay. But the desperate, almost addictive need for outrage, and the assumption about comic books that they are all about the false sense of transformation, presumed that this was the character and this would be the character would be. All of my books are about characters who change.
All right.
Reuben Flagg is a different character by the end of the first arc of the book than he was when he began, because his eyes were opened and enlightened. Batman is exactly the same guy he is today that he was in 1939. Bruce Wayne has not changed. He still presumes that striking dramatic poses is the equivalent of being worthy of attention. You know, come on, that's what, and that's,
Well, and
it's like what Raymond Chandler said about Alan Ladd. It's a small boy's idea of a tough guy.
And do you think that's also because of the corporate stance that you can't change the character? That they
That's
have to
part of
be
it.
the
It's
same?
also, I think the audience is willing to accept shit in the name of their own, you know, misguided understanding of their own childhood.
But as an auteur, you're allowed to kill your
I can do whatever I want.
characters. Yeah.
Anytime I fucking play this.
What didn't Alan Moore say something about what makes a legend is when you can kill the character for real?
I don't know.
Like,